And it's 9 o'clock. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or evening if you're watching from somewhere else in the world, or if you're watching this on the replay. If you are watching live, hello, shout out to you. Say hi in the comments. If you're watching on the replay, let me know when and where you're watching from. It'd be great to have an idea of when you guys are tuning in. Okay, so I am Duncan Price from Mind Affinity, for anyone who doesn't know. I'm a therapist and coach, and I help people engage with the amazing power that they're already using, but probably using to trip themselves up. I know that's what humans are really good at, and actually use that same power to move themselves forward instead. But that's enough of a waffly introduction. What I'm here to talk about today is confirmation bias. So, hi Adele. This is the first video in a whole series of videos where I'm going to be looking into different biases, cognitive biases. I'm going to use some big words, but don't worry, I'll explain them all as we go. And basically, cognitive biases, if you haven't seen my introduction video, welcome to go back and watch that. But basically, we take shortcuts with our decision-making processes all the time without even realizing that we're doing it. And we are naturally inclined to lean in certain directions, make certain assumptions, and think in certain ways. These are referred to as biases. So confirmation bias is the one we're going to be focusing on today, and it's a big one. It's really relevant at the moment on Facebook and social platforms in general. You'll see an awful lot of this going on. So just before I begin, shout out to Michael Nagels, yo homie, and hi Higgs. Okay, so firstly, what is confirmation bias? It's probably the bias that's most talked about, or certainly one that is, because it's a very common one that has quite a big impact. It is the selective collection and memory of information and evidence that supports your existing belief. Okay, so to put that in a different way, we naturally, there are things that we already believe, which could be that we believe them because they were presented to us as solid evidence in the past. It could be that we've just always grown up believing that, influenced by other people around us. It could be for any reason at all. But things that we already believe, if we're looking at evidence that supports that, we're more likely to look at it, we're more likely to believe it, we're more likely to remember it. If we come across evidence that doesn't support that, then we're less likely to want to read it in the first place, more likely to be looking for the holes in it and find the errors. I've just realized I've still got a banner scrolling across the bottom saying starting soon. Let's get rid of that, shall we? That's better. And I should have a different logo up there. Well, anyway, yes, so we're more likely to find holes and pick things apart if we don't agree with it. We're also more likely to forget that we've ever read it. So, as I say, Facebook arguments are a great place to see confirmation bias going on, where someone says something, someone else disagrees, and it doesn't matter what evidence you put forward, they're not going to change their opinion based on your evidence in the same way that you're not going to change your opinion based on their evidence. Notice I'm talking in general terms. There are always exceptions, okay? And there are things that you can do to control for this, to change this. But in general terms, that's what you'll find happening. Yes, James, I'll put that into Yorkshire accountant speak, so you don't have to worry about the big words. Although I do have one really big sentence coming up in a minute that you'll switch off from because it's too wordy. You like numbers. Yeah, so it's also been referred to as my side bias. So that's just another term for it from where it was researched by different people, where yeah, they were looking into it. Now, different psychologists will argue slightly different perspectives on it. So some will be slightly more purist in the term confirmation bias and only apply it when looking at existing research. So when looking into stuff, looking at research, identifying the stuff that you agree with and ignoring the stuff that you don't. Other people will be a bit more open with it and will include not just your memory of and looking into past studies, but also your ability to and willingness as well to listen to new information. It's all part of the same umbrella of confirmation bias. So why do we do it then? Where does that come from? The motives that we have, the reason that we do that, there's two main reasons for it. One, it's around it's a defense thing. Yeah, so we want to feel validated, and it's important for us if we believe something. And when I say believe, that can be deeply entrenched religious beliefs, or it can just be an idea that we've recently come across. But if it's something that we believe, we've already accepted that we believe that, then we want to feel validated. We don't want to be wrong, and so we kind of so we've got that validity argument going, that we just want to be right, we want to be valid. If someone attacks our beliefs, we feel like they're attacking us, and it's very easy for us to then take it personally, which is why we get defensive. And as soon as you begin to get defensive in any way, shape, or form, you're actually closing down that logical approach that we would otherwise be able to have, and therefore the emotional side takes over, the irrational side takes over, and the bias will have an even greater impact in that moment. So the more clouded our judgment becomes, or rather our judgment becomes more clouded if we feel we're being defensive, and we'll naturally feel defensive if someone is arguing with us and attacking. We perceive it as attacking our beliefs because we see them as being a part of us. And then the other side of it is accuracy. It's important for us to be correct. We like to be right. That's something that was a big thing for me. I've got a lot better at it. I think there's probably still room for improvement there. And so with that accuracy tendency, that desire to want to be right, without realizing it, what we weigh up subconsciously is it worth me admitting that I'm wrong, and therefore ultimately vulnerable, which is where the defense thing comes in again, in order to absorb this new information? And the idea is that actually we prefer to not be wrong. That's our kind of default position, that we want to be right. So if we ignore anything that shows us that we're wrong, then we can carry on feeling right, and it's fine. So it's easy to just dismiss information that disagrees with you because you don't want to be wrong. I've got a quote here that I want to read. So this will be some nice wordy stuff for you, James Chisholm. And this comes from Dante's Divine Comedy, and I quite like this quote. "Opinion, hasty, often can incline to the wrong side, and then affect one's own opinion, binds, confines the mind." So this is something that's been studied. It was studied a lot in the 60s. It's been studied a bit before then, but it's also something that goes back to Dante's time. It also goes way back to the ancient Greeks. You'll find quotes and references to confirmation bias, though not by that name, all through the ages. It's something that we've been doing for a long time and will continue to do. So I've mentioned social media, and you'll see that time and time again on social media. I've got Alaya, thank you, in the comments saying one video I've seen recently is what I automatically think of: angry face. So here's the thing. It's easy and normal and understandable to have that angry face reaction to it. But by doing so, you're also encouraging greater bias yourself. Take a breath and think about where they're coming from and their perspective on it. And I know you well enough to assume that that video probably is a load of rubbish, but it's worth still considering that other angle and other element, so that you can make sure that you're not just buying into that confirmation bias yourself. Because if you were to put your opinion out there in opposition to that, the people who believe that would be getting angry about what you're saying as well. Do you see? So other examples, places you need to be really careful of: scientific research. So it's normal and natural for scientists, even though they understand the scientific method and how things should be done, it's still really easy to read into your own subjects and pick out studies and pick out the stuff that resonates with your original hypothesis and what you were expecting. It's also really easy to dismiss work that goes against what you're saying and vice versa. So it's really important to control for that and to have that understanding, which is why we have peer-reviewed published studies rather than one person writes a study and then suddenly it's fact, unless of course you're the Daily Mail, in which case that's perfectly fine. That's how it works, right? I've made some notes down here. I can't read my own writing. No idea what that says. So here's another example though, of something that you'll see: confirmation bias. So this is a completely hypothetical example, and any relevance to real life situations is just completely by chance. But let's imagine that there's someone who's in power. Let's say they hold a high position in running a country, for example. And then there was some big kind of global impact and risk to the safety of the population across the globe. Now, let's imagine that that person that's in power, hypothetically, at the start of this, kind of dismissed it and didn't really think that it was going to be as bad as people were making out. And it was perfectly understandable at the beginning, though arguably not the right way to err, that someone in that position, or anyone really, would look at the early unfolding of the situation and go, oh, people are overreacting. If you've already made that your decision, that people are overreacting and that it's something that's just going to be fine and just going to pass, then it's really easy that this confirmation bias starts to play a part. And it doesn't matter what experts you've got around you, on whatever side they fall and whatever they're saying. If you've decided that it's not actually going to be such a big deal, and then especially if you've got other things going on in your personal life at the time, then that's going to draw some of your focus. And so it's really easy to end up in a place where you're governing a country and making decisions for a whole population based on just that confirmation bias of not wanting to admit that you were wrong and say, wait a minute, actually, we need to do things differently. And then, of course, when you do decide to do things differently, people absolutely play up to that. And you can see, it's a great example with the whole defense and accuracy in this hypothetical situation, that the population would then say, oh, well, how come you're saying now that we need to do things that you weren't saying before, for example? Wherever you sit on that, wherever your opinion sits, it's worth recognizing that you yourself, and me myself as well, will have elements of confirmation bias within the conversations that you have around it. There'll be some people listening to me now who think they know who I'm talking about. It's hypothetical, Michael. It's completely hypothetical. And there'll be some people that completely agree with the implications of what I'm saying. There'll be other people that think that the perspective was right all along, and everyone all sorts of places in between. That's an example of confirmation bias. The way you'll deal with that kind of situation is you'll type your argument back, get it off your chest, then delete it instead of sending. That way I'm letting my anger out without encouraging them. That's a great shout. If you're in the social media world and you feel frustrated by something, type out your response and don't worry about sending it. It's a great way to also kind of help understand your own thoughts when you write them out like that. So yeah, good idea, good shout. Another example is yes, just hypothetical. Another example is paranormal stuff. And it's up to you in your mind what you group in with paranormal and sort of extra human as ideas, religious beliefs, etc., etc. But it's once you believe in the existence of something, then it's really it's very easy for that to become entrenched, and it can be really difficult to step away from that because of that confirmation bias. Especially if you've spent your life believing in. So let's say Uh, and if this offends anyone that's deeply religious, then that's not my aim. That's not my intention. But let's say that you were indoctrinated into a set religion. You've spent your life growing up believing that, and then someone comes along and tests that and questions that and expects you to question it. Well, if you were at that point to accept that the new information and that everything that you previously believed was wrong, there's a real natural and understandable resistance to that, because you don't want to admit that you've been doing things wrong, or you've been incorrect, or you've been living your life based on a belief that's been inaccurate for however long you've been alive or indoctrinated up to that point, right? So that doesn't mean that people can't have those religious beliefs and still be open-minded. There are absolutely people that do approach it that way, and a lot more respect for them. Um, and then another example of it, and this is a really important one to consider, is the impact that it can have on mental health, or mental ill health specifically. So if you're feeling depressed, and if you're feeling anxious, if you're worrying about all the stuff that could go wrong, if you have low self-worth, um, all of these things are kind of alarms and warning bells go off for confirmation bias. Because if you feel like you're not good enough, for example, then you'll go through your day, and the stuff that you do well, you won't remember. It won't be relevant to you. The stuff that you didn't do well, any opportunity that you could classify as a failure, and sometimes that would be something as daft as, I don't know, dropping a pen, right? But you'll remember those because that plays to your bias. That confirms your existing opinion, confirmation bias. So the worse that you're feeling about yourself, the more mistakes you're likely to make, but the more you'll remember those mistakes and use those as further evidence to say, yep, this is what's happening and this is the problem. And so it continues in that vicious spiral. Okay, so that's confirmation bias. That's how it works. That's the places you need to really watch out for it. What do you do to fix it? How do you allow for that? What do you do to get around it and overcome it? Well, it's very, very simple. And also really not simple at the same time. The not simple part is that this is a natural thing. All humans do this. You won't ever get to a point where this doesn't impact you. And if you believe that it's not impacting you, then that in itself is playing into those cognitive biases, right? The key is, particularly when you're examining new evidence and information, especially if you're testing an idea, whether that's, in a scientific sense of having a hypothesis and carrying out an experiment, or whether that's in the natural form of um, trying out a different bedtime routine with your child. I don't know, but whenever you're doing something new, be aware of it. Whenever you're looking at new information, or having an argument or debate on Facebook, understand that other people are experiencing this cognitive bias too. So it's easier to understand why they're getting so irate, and it's easier to stay patient with those people that disagree with you, but also recognize that you're likely doing the same thing as well. So be prepared to look at the information from another side. The simple answer to any bias, and cognitive confirmation bias is a brilliant example of this. The simple answer is be aware of it. The more you understand it, the more readily you'll recognize it. And then don't beat yourself up for thinking that way. Accept that that's human to do that. The very fact that you've noticed yourself doing it allows you the opportunity to control for it by questioning it and by looking at it from a different perspective. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is confirmation bias. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hey, Sarah, thanks for joining us. You joined in just at the end, but if anyone has any questions about confirmation bias, or any other biases that they're aware of that they'd like to know more about, because I'm going to be doing another video 9 o'clock next Thursday and every Thursday morning for the foreseeable future, on a different bias each week, going into a bit of detail same as today, talking about what the bias is, where you can find it, how it impacts you, where it comes from, and how to overcome it or control for it at least. Overcome might be the wrong terminology, as you won't ever technically overcome it because it's something that we naturally do as humans anyway. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions coming in the comments, so I'm going to leave the video there. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you know anyone that you think would benefit from this video or any others in the series, please do share it with them. My intention is hopefully that next week it will be live via the Mind Affinity Facebook page and also on my YouTube channel, which I've kind of soft launched, and is basically just going to be this series going out for the time being. So thanks very much for watching, and if you do have any questions or biases that you want covered, please just get in touch. Take care.